Ever feel like you're running on a treadmill that's constantly speeding up? Like you're putting in everything you have, just to stay in the same place? Howard, a 47-year-old machine operator with 17 years under his belt, knew that feeling intimately. For him, that treadmill was a mountain of debt. $28,500 in maxed-out credit cards and $16,200 in back taxes looming over him. He'd spent years just trying to keep his head above water, taking extra shifts, juggling payments, ignoring the threatening letters that piled up on his kitchen table. His little fishing trips to the lake at 4 a.m. were all he looked forward to. Howard rented a room from a retired woman. It's impeccably clean and sparsely furnished, reflecting the military precision he applied to everything but his finances. He saw his kids, Sarah and Ben, on weekends, but the weight of his failures hung heavy between them. He felt like he'd let them down, like the divorce, amicable as it was, had been fueled by his constant financial stress. He was drowning. Then came the wage garnishment notice at work. He remembers the moment so vividly. The fluorescent lights of the factory buzzing overhead, the clatter of machinery fading into a dull roar in his ears, the pit in his stomach as his supervisor, a young guy barely out of his 20s, read the paper. The pity in the kid's eyes, that was it. He broke. It wasn't the money, it was the shame. The feeling of being exposed, of everyone knowing he was a failure. "I got this," Howard mumbled, but his voice lacked conviction. The walk back to his machine felt like a mile. That night, staring at the ceiling, sleep evaded him. He thought about his dad, a mechanic who could fix anything with his bare hands. He thought about Aerotech, the high-tech manufacturing firm where he was once a rising star, a shop foreman at just 30, fired for a mistake that wasn't his, scapegoated to protect someone else. 17 years spent working jobs beneath him, fueled by fear of reaching for anything more. This was it, wasn't it? Rock bottom. Howard's hands, calloused and stained with years of machine oil, clenched into fists. $44,700. That's what it all added up to. $28,500 in maxed-out credit cards, a debt built from the slow bleed of divorce and trying to keep up appearances for his kids. $16,200 to the IRS, taxes he hadn't been able to pay when Sarah needed braces and Ben's baseball team needed new uniforms. He'd always figured he'd catch up, but the hole just kept getting deeper. Now, at 47, staring down bankruptcy, he felt like a complete failure. He remembered Sarah's smile the day he taught her to ride her bike, Ben's pride when they rebuilt that old Triumph engine, the metal gleaming under his hands. Those were the moments he lived for, the glimmers of light in the long, gray grind. But the light was dimming. His mind flashed to the dusty business plan he'd hidden away in a notebook, a dream of opening a custom motorcycle shop, a place where he could build things again, his way. A place where maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild himself. The fear was like a cold hand on his throat. The room felt smaller than usual. The walls seemed to be closing in. He got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street. Another night, another shift, another day closer to the inevitable. The dull ache in his shoulders throbbed. He was tired, bone-tired. He thought about calling his kids, but what could he say? "Hey, kids, your old man's a screw-up. Just thought you should know." No, he'd just see them on Saturday, put on a brave face, pretend everything was okay. He was good at pretending. He went to the library the next day and picked up a book on Stoicism. He felt ridiculous. Philosophy. He was a machine operator, not some fancy intellectual, but he needed something, some kind of answer, some kind of way to make sense of the mess he'd made. He sat in his room, the book open on his lap, but his mind kept drifting back to that look on his supervisor's face. It wasn't malice, it was pity, and that was worse, much worse. That night he couldn't sleep again. This time he didn't bother trying. He got up at 3 a.m., grabbed his fishing gear, and headed to the lake. As the first sliver of dawn broke over the water, he cast his line. The air was still and cold, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. He wasn't thinking about bankruptcy or debt or the future. He was just there in that moment with the rising sun and the promise of a fish on the line. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Felt numb. All the anger, the shame, the fear, it had burned away, leaving behind a hollow ache. The worst had happened. He'd been exposed, he'd hit rock bottom, and strangely there was a sense of peace in that, because when you're at rock bottom, there's nowhere else to go but up. As the sun fully crested the horizon, a new thought flickered in his mind. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. The fear hadn't died, not completely, but it had lost its power. It didn't control him anymore. The 4 a.m. darkness was a familiar friend. Howard, 47, knew it better than sleep these days. He'd pull on his worn work boots, the steel toe cold against his foot, a sensation as predictable as the ache in his lower back. The drive to the plant was a blur of headlights and low-humming engine, the radio a mix of static and country songs he didn't really hear. It was just noise to fill the silence. His shift started at 6 a.m. sharp. The factory air hit him like a wall, hot, greasy, and thick with the smell of coolant. He walked to his machine, the same one he'd operated for 17 years. 17 years spent watching gears spin, metal bend, and the clock tick by with agonizing slowness. He'd been a foreman once years ago, on track to something big. Aerotech was in the past. Now he was just Howard, the machine operator, the guy with the wage garnishment. The work was mindless. Load, tighten, press, repeat. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Sometimes he'd catch himself staring blankly at the spinning metal, lost in thoughts of Sarah, 16, and Ben, 14. They were good kids, but he knew they saw him differently now. Not as the dad who built them go-karts, but as the dad who couldn't afford to pay his bills. "Hey, Howard," a voice called out. It was Mark, a younger guy who worked the next machine over. "Heard you got hit with a garnishment. Rough man." Howard just nodded, avoiding eye contact. He didn't want Mark's pity, didn't want anyone's pity. "Yeah, it is what it is," he mumbled, turning back to his work. "Keep moving, keep working, keep pretending everything was okay." $20 an hour didn't stretch far these days, not with $44,700 in debt hanging over him. Lunch was a stale sandwich and a lukewarm coffee in the break room, surrounded by the same faces, the same stories of mortgages and car troubles. Howard ate in silence, his gaze fixed on the flickering fluorescent lights. He thought about his dad, a mechanic who could fix anything. He always said, if you can't fix it yourself, you're just throwing money away. Howard had failed. He couldn't fix this. The afternoon dragged on. His shoulders ached, his eyes burned, and his mind wandered. He thought about the bankruptcy lawyer he was supposed to call, about the Triumph motorcycle plans gathering dust in his room. He could feel the shame rising again, choking him. He pushed it down, focused on the machine, on the numbers, on the steady rhythm of the work. Finally, the whistle blew. 4 p.m. Freedom. He punched out, grabbed his jacket, and walked to his car, each step heavy with exhaustion. The drive home was just as silent as the drive in, but the darkness felt different now. It wasn't just a familiar friend, it was a reminder of everything he'd lost. He ate a can of soup in his small room, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. He switched on the TV, flipping through channels until he found a WWII documentary. He watched silently, fascinated by the stories of men who had endured far worse. He envied them, their purpose, their sense of duty. He had none of that. At 9:30 p.m., he turned off the light and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come easy. He knew he would be up at 3 a.m. again, heading to the lake, searching for a moment of peace in the pre-dawn darkness. It wasn't much, but it was something. He had to find something to hold on to. The next morning at the plant started like any other. Howard, 47, went through the motions. Check the machine, load the materials, set the parameters. His mind was a million miles away. He knew the garnishment notice was coming. It was only a matter of time. He just hoped it wouldn't happen in front of anyone. Around mid-morning, his supervisor, a young guy named Kevin, approached his station. Kevin usually kept his distance, letting Howard do his job. He was a good kid, respectful, but there was always a hint of pity in his eyes, like he knew Howard's best days were long behind him. "Howard, can I see you in my office for a minute?" Kevin asked, his voice neutral. Howard's stomach dropped. This was it. He nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. He followed Kevin into the small, cramped office, the air thick with the scent of cheap coffee and desperation. Kevin closed the door and gestured to a chair. Howard remained standing. Kevin cleared his throat, shuffled some papers on his desk. He avoided eye contact. "Look, Howard, I just got this from payroll," he said, finally holding up a familiar-looking legal document, a wage garnishment notice. The plant supervisor continued, "I don't know what's going on, but, well, HR needs this. It's out of my hands. I'm sorry, man." Kevin actually looked sorry, truly embarrassed by the situation. Howard stared at the notice, his mind blank. He'd known it was coming, but seeing it in black and white, hearing the apologetic tone in Kevin's voice, it was like a punch to the gut. All the shame he'd been holding back for years, the sense of failure, it all came crashing down on him at once. He met Kevin's eyes, and for the first time he saw not pity but something worse, understanding. Kevin knew. He understood that Howard was a man on the edge, a man who was losing everything. It was a look Howard had seen in the mirror too many times. "It's okay, Kevin," Howard said, his voice barely a whisper. It's fine." He reached for the notice, his hand trembling slightly. As he took the paper, Kevin laid a hand on his arm. "Howard, if there's anything I can do," Kevin started. Howard pulled his arm away, a wave of anger washing over him. Not at Kevin, but at himself, at the situation, at everything. Just leave it, okay?" He turned and walked out of the office, the garnishment notice clutched in his hand. Back at his machine, Howard tried to focus, but his hands were shaking too much. He fumbled with the controls, nearly dropping a piece of metal. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He looked around the factory floor at the other men and women, each lost in their own world of work and worry. He imagined they were all looking at him, whispering, judging. He couldn't do it. He couldn't stay here, not like this. He walked over to his toolbox, grabbed his lunch bag, and headed for the exit. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. He drove to the lake, parked the car, and got out. The sun was high in the sky, casting a harsh glare on the water. He walked to his usual spot, sat down on the bank, and stared out at the waves. The shame was overwhelming. He felt like he was drowning in it. He thought about his kids, Sarah, 16, and Ben, 14. He'd promised them a fishing trip this summer, a trip he now knew he couldn't afford. He was failing them again. He reached into his bag, pulled out his fishing rod, and started to assemble it. His hands moved mechanically, a familiar routine. As he tied the line, he thought about his dad, the mechanic who taught him everything he knew. His dad always said, "A man provides for his family." Howard was failing at that too. Then it hit him. That look in Kevin's eyes, the pity, the understanding. He'd become a stereotype, a cautionary tale. A man who had lost everything, a man defined by his failures. He stood up, grabbed the fishing rod, and snapped it in half. The sound echoed across the water. He threw the broken pieces into the lake, watching them sink. It was a small act of defiance, a useless gesture, but it felt good. He got back in his car, started the engine, and drove away. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay here. He couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a cycle of shame and regret. Something had to change. The road stretched out before him, a gray ribbon under the harsh afternoon sun. Howard didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. Couldn't face another shift, another pitying glance. 17 years. 17 years he'd been a machine operator, a shadow of the foreman he once was at Aerotech. A rising star, they said, until they needed someone to blame. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, $44,700 in debt. He saw Sarah's face, her hopeful eyes when he promised her that new dress for prom. Ben needed new football cleats. He couldn't even afford a stupid fishing trip. He was drowning them too. He pulled over to the side of the road, the gravel crunching under his tires. He cut the engine and sat there, the silence broken only by the hum of distant traffic. He remembered the day he taught Sarah to ride her bike, the scraped knees, the triumphant grin. Then Ben, a little daredevil who went tearing down the street without looking back. proud moments. They felt like a lifetime ago from a different man. "Damn it, Howard," he muttered, his voice cracking. He slammed his fist on the dashboard. "I am done living like this." The words hung in the air, raw and desperate. He thought about the wage garnishment, the divorce, the years of scraping by, the constant weight of failure pressing down on him, suffocating him. He pictured the stack of bills on his dresser, the IRS notices, the credit card statements. The shame burned. He took a deep breath, the air heavy in his lungs. He remembered his dad's calloused hands stained with oil, always fixing things. "If you want something done right, Howard, do it yourself." The old man's voice echoed in his head. He thought of his secret dream, the motorcycle shop he had sketched out a business plan for over the past decade, the custom builds he saw in his mind's eye. A chance to build something, not just for money, but for himself, for his kids. He reached for his phone, his hand trembling slightly. He dialed a number. A woman answered. "Mrs. Petrovic, it's Howard. I need to ask you something." He paused, then his eyes cleared and his voice deepened. He knew what he needed to do. He knew it wouldn't be easy. "I need to talk about ending my lease. I'm going to get a second job. Maybe then I can actually do something." Mrs. Petrovic was surprised. Howard, quiet as a church mouse, never asked for anything. "Howard, are you all right? What's going on?" He could hear the worry in her voice, a genuine concern that cut through the fog of his self-pity. He explained his situation, the wage garnishment, the bankruptcy looming. He didn't sugarcoat it. He laid it all bare, the shame and the fear, the desperation. "I understand, Howard," she said softly. "Don't you worry about the lease. We'll figure something out." But it wasn't just the practical solution that gave Howard a jolt. It was her belief, her simple faith that he would find a way. It was the opposite of the pity he had seen on his supervisor's face. It was encouragement from someone who barely knew him. He hung up the phone, a new resolve hardening his gaze. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to fight. The fear hadn't magically disappeared, but it had shrunk, pushed aside by a flicker of hope. He remembered a quote from one of those philosophy books he secretly devoured at the library, something about facing the abyss and refusing to blink. He had been staring into the abyss for years. Now, he was ready to stare back. The next day at the plant, Howard approached his supervisor. His hands were still calloused, his posture still stooped, but his eyes were different. They held a light. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice firm. "I know about the garnishment. I want to work as much overtime as possible. I'll take any shift, any job you've got." His supervisor, a young guy named Kevin, looked surprised. "Howard, I don't know if that's possible. We have rules." Howard stood his ground. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for a chance to dig myself out of this hole." Kevin paused, seeing something new in Howard's expression. "All right, Howard," he said. "I'll see what I can do." The extra hours were brutal. Howard was pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion. His hands ached, his back screamed, his mind felt like it was running on fumes. But with every extra shift, with every additional dollar earned, his spirit lifted. He wasn't just a machine operator anymore. He was a fighter. He thought about Sarah and Ben. He pictured their faces, their smiles. He had to do this for them. He wanted Asterisk to do this for them. He also started digging into his secret motorcycle plans. Every free moment was spent refining the designs, researching parts, pricing equipment. He knew he couldn't open the shop tomorrow, but he could start laying the groundwork. He could start building something real, something tangible. The bankruptcy was still coming, he knew it, but it wouldn't define him. It would be just a chapter, not the whole story. The fear was still there, but now it had a rival, a burning desire to rebuild, to create, to become the man he knew he could be. The man he almost lost. That night after his shift, Howard sat in his rented room. The bare bulb overhead cast long shadows on the meticulously organized space. He stared at the notebook on his small desk, the one filled with sketches and calculations for his motorcycle shop. For years, it had been a fantasy, a childish dream. Now it felt different. It felt like a lifeline. He opened the book and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote, "Day 0. Underneath, he penned a simple promise. "I will not let this break me. I will build something again." He wasn't sure who he was writing to, maybe his kids, maybe himself, maybe just the silence of the room. But the words felt solid, real. He closed the book, the weight of it comforting in his calloused hands. He looked at the clock on the wall, 9:30 p.m. He needed sleep, but his mind was racing. He thought about the bankruptcy. He thought about the shame, the judgment. He imagined Sarah and Ben hearing about it at school. He clenched his fists. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about their respect. It was about showing them that their old man wasn't a quitter. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. Then he thought about the shop. He pictured the smell of oil and metal, the roar of engines, the satisfaction of bringing a dead machine back to life. He saw himself teaching Ben how to weld, Sarah helping with the books. A flicker of hope ignited within him, chasing away some of the darkness. He could do this. He had to. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. It rang a few times before a sleepy voice answered. "Dad," it was Sarah. "Hey, honey," Howard said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Just wanted to say goodnight. Love you." "Love you too, Dad," she said. "See you Saturday." "You bet," Howard replied. "We'll go fishing." He hung up, feeling a surge of determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He looked around the room at the sparse furniture, the bare walls. This wasn't his forever. This was just a temporary stop. He stood up straighter, the ache in his back still there, but less pronounced. He walked over to the window and looked out at the quiet street. The world was dark, but in the distance, he could see the faintest hint of dawn. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Let's do this." The 4 a.m. alarm was a death knell. Howard, 47-year-old machine operator, slammed it off, the metallic clang echoing in the small room he rented. His body screamed in protest as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. Every muscle ached, a reminder of the relentless hours on the factory floor, chasing quotas, trying to outrun the debt. $20 an hour didn't stretch far when you were staring down $44,700 in combined credit card debt and back taxes. He shuffled to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face. Looking in the mirror, he saw a stranger. The man staring back was hollow-eyed, the lines around his mouth etched deeper. He was a far cry from the ambitious foreman at Aerotech, the guy who thought he had it all figured out. That firing 17 years ago had done more than cost him a job. It had stolen his confidence, his drive. Fishing, he needed the escape. The quiet solitude of the lake was the only thing that kept the darkness at bay. He grabbed his tackle box and rod, slipped out of the house, and into his beat-up Ford pickup. The engine coughed to life and he drove in silence, the pre-dawn air biting at his face. At the lake, the world was still and gray. He cast his line, the lure arcing through the air, landing with a soft plop. He waited, the silence broken only by the lapping of water against the shore. He thought about Sarah and Ben. Weekends were all he had with them now. He pictured Sarah's smile, Ben's eagerness to show him his latest video game trick. He couldn't let them see him like this, broken. He had to find a way out, a way to provide for them, to earn back their respect. The first week was a blur of pain and exhaustion. 10-hour shifts turning into 12, skipping lunch to save a few bucks. His hands, already calloused from years of working with machinery, were raw and blistered. Sleep became a luxury he could barely afford. He thought about quitting, about giving up, about just letting the bankruptcy swallow him whole. The shame gnawed at him, whispering insidious doubts in his ear. "You're a failure, Howard. You always were." He pushed the thought away, focusing on the rhythm of the machine, the feel of the metal beneath his fingers. He remembered his dad, a mechanic who could fix anything. He remembered the pride he felt when he rebuilt that Triumph engine, the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life. That skill was still there, buried beneath layers of fear and regret. He just needed to find a way to use it. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, he found himself staring at the motorcycle plans he'd been sketching for years. The custom shop, the one he'd always dreamed of opening. It seemed like a distant fantasy, a foolish pipe dream. He'd never be able to get the money, the loans, He stopped himself. That was the old Howard talking, the one paralyzed by fear. The new Howard, the one forged in the fires of humiliation, had nothing left to lose. He pulled out a worn notebook, the pages filled with scribbled ideas and calculations. He started to write, his pen scratching furiously against the paper. He had a plan, a long shot, but it was something. A spark of hope flickering in the darkness. That night he slept for 6 hours straight, the best sleep he'd had in months. The ache in his shoulders was still there, but it felt different, less like defeat, more like work. The kind of work that might actually mean something. The next morning, Howard woke before the alarm. Day 12. He felt different. The usual dread was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it wasn't deafening. He made coffee stronger than usual and drove to the lake. The water was still, reflecting the pale dawn light. He cast his line, but his mind wasn't on fishing. He was thinking about that notebook, the custom shop, the look of pity on his supervisor's face. He reeled in his line, packed up his gear, and headed to work. The machine hummed, a familiar, monotonous drone. He went through the motions, his hands moving with practiced ease, but something was off. He caught a slight vibration, a telltale sign of a problem. Usually, he would just ignore it, let someone else deal with it. But today, he couldn't. It bothered him. "Hey, Jim," Howard said to a younger operator next to him. "That 340 over there, it's got a shimmy. Check the bearings." Jim, surprised that Howard was even talking to him, shrugged. "Yeah, I noticed. Figured it would last till Friday." Howard didn't say anything, just walked over to the machine and started inspecting it. Within minutes, he'd identified the problem. A loose bolt causing the vibration. He grabbed a wrench and tightened it. The shimmy disappeared. Jim looked impressed. "Damn, Howard, you saved us a shutdown." That evening after work, Howard didn't go straight to his room. Instead, he drove to the library. He knew it sounded crazy, but he needed to learn more about bankruptcy, about his options. He remembered his father always saying, "Learn the rules of the game before you play." He spent hours poring over books and legal documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. The legal jargon was confusing, intimidating, but he kept at it, determined to understand. He found a pro bono legal clinic that offered free consultations, made an appointment. Day 16. Sarah called, needing money for a school trip. Howard felt a familiar pang of guilt. He hated saying no to his kids. "I'm a little short this month, honey, but let me see what I can do." He knew he couldn't afford it, not really. But he also knew that Sarah deserved that trip. He checked his bank account. Pathetic. But then he remembered the overtime he'd put in last week. It wouldn't be much, but it was enough. He transferred the money, swallowed his pride. He would eat ramen for the next 2 weeks. At work, Howard started taking on extra tasks, fixing broken machines, volunteering for the jobs nobody else wanted. He surprised his coworkers, his supervisor even. "You've been different lately, Howard," his supervisor said. "More engaged." Howard just shrugged, trying to keep busy. But inside, something was shifting. He was remembering who he used to be, the guy who loved fixing things, the guy who took pride in his work, the man he almost lost. Day 21. His meeting at the legal clinic. Howard sat nervously in the waiting room, surrounded by people in similar situations. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. He was one of them, a statistic, a failure. But then he remembered the look on Jim's face when he fixed the machine, the relief in Sarah's voice when he sent her the money. Maybe he wasn't a complete failure. Not yet. The lawyer was young but sharp. She listened patiently as Howard explained his situation, his debts, his fears. She didn't judge him, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just laid out his options, explained the process. Chapter 7 was probably the best route, she said, a clean slate, but it would mean losing everything. Howard felt a knot in his stomach. Everything he had worked for gone. He thought about his kids, his dreams. "What about that motorcycle shop?" the lawyer asked, glancing at his intake form. "That's just a pipe dream," Howard said, dismissing it. "Maybe not," she replied. "Bankruptcy can be a fresh start. It clears the way for you to build something new." Her words struck a chord, build something new. It was exactly what he wanted, what he needed. He straightened his shoulders, looked her in the eye. "Okay," Howard said. "Let's do it." He walked out of that office feeling lighter than he had in years. The bankruptcy was still looming, a dark cloud on the horizon. But for the first time, Howard saw a sliver of light. Day 30, 1 month in. Howard woke before the alarm, a first in longer than he could remember. Fishing felt different now. It wasn't just escape, it was preparation. He cast his line, the rhythmic swoosh a counterpoint to the factory's mechanical symphony he'd soon face. The lake was still, reflecting the pre-dawn sky like a mirror. He wasn't running from his life anymore, he was walking into it. Sarah noticed first. She saw him picking her up for their Saturday lunch. "Dad, you look different." Howard usually shuffled, eyes down. Now he met her gaze. "Different good or different bad?" he asked, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "Good different," she said, studying him. "Like you're actually here, not just a ghost." Her words hit him hard. He'd been a ghost, adrift. He squeezed her shoulder. "Trying to be, kiddo, trying to be." Ben caught onto it too. He even dared to ask Howard about the wage garnishment. "Is it true, Dad, about the money thing?" Howard didn't flinch. "Yeah, it's true, Ben. I messed up, big time, but I'm fixing it." He saw the flicker of worry in Ben's eyes, then something else, a hesitant hope. He wanted his son to know he wasn't giving up. They talked for a bit, and Howard showed him the notebook with the motorcycle shop business plan in it that he'd been hiding for years. Even at the plant, people noticed. Jim, the young guy whose machine he'd fixed, stopped him in the break room. "Hey, Howard, heard about what happened with the garnishment. Rough stuff, man." Howard braced himself for pity, but it didn't come. "Yeah, it is," he said, "but it is what it is." Jim nodded. "You gonna be all right?" Howard looked him in the eye. "Yeah, Jim, I am." Later that week, his supervisor, Frank, called him into the office. Howard's heart hammered. He thought he was gonna lose his job too. "Howard, you've been here a long time." Frank paused, shuffling papers. "I know things have been difficult." Howard kept his mouth shut, waiting. "Look, I don't know what you're going through, but I've seen a change in you. You're sharper, focused, and you're helping the younger guys. That means something." Frank looked up, his expression unreadable. "Just keep your head down, do your job. That's all I ask." It wasn't a declaration of undying support, but it was something. It was respect. And right now, respect felt like a lifeline. He had to get through this. That night, Howard sat in his rented room, the bankruptcy papers spread out on the small table. It still felt like a punch to the gut, but it didn't paralyze him anymore. He saw it as a necessary evil, a painful surgery to remove the dead weight. He picked up his notebook, the one with the motorcycle shop plans. He opened it to a clean page. He started sketching, his hand moving with a newfound purpose. The shame was still there, a dull ache, but it was no longer the only thing he felt. Hope, small and fragile, was starting to bloom, like a weed pushing through concrete. The ghost of the man he was supposed to be was fading, replaced by the solid form of the man he was becoming. The next morning, the fishing trip felt different. Howard still felt the weight of the debt, $44,700 hanging over him like a storm cloud. But the fear wasn't a screaming voice anymore, more like a dull hum. He cast his line, the lure arcing through the pre-dawn darkness. He wasn't just trying to escape this time. He was thinking, planning. He remembered his dad always tinkering in the garage fixing things. He could almost smell the oil and hear the clatter of tools. That was pride, real pride. Not the kind that came from a fancy title or a fat paycheck, but the kind that came from creating something with your own two hands. Howard had that in him. Frank's words at work echoed, sharper, focused. He needed to use that focus. He knew he could still fix things. He started small. First, the leaky faucet in the communal bathroom at the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson, the retired woman who owned the place, had been complaining for weeks. Howard fixed it in under an hour. She beamed, offering him a slice of apple pie. It wasn't money, but it was worth more. Next, his daughter Sarah's beat-up old bike. The gears were shot, the chain rusty. He spent an afternoon in the garage, cleaning, oiling, adjusting. Sarah's smile when he gave it back was enough to fill the hole the bankruptcy was digging. He was doing something. Then he saw an ad on Craigslist. Motorcycle mechanic needed weekends only. He almost dismissed it, but the shame hum was quieter now, drowned out by a new sound, a faint engine revving in his chest. He called the number. A gruff voice answered, "Lose cycles." Howard hesitated, then spoke. "I saw your ad. I'm a mechanic." He sold himself short, said he'd worked on machines most of his life. Lou grunted, told him to come by Saturday morning. Saturday, Howard walked into Lou's. The place was a greasy, glorious mess of half-finished choppers and roaring engines. Lou, a burly man with a handlebar mustache, eyed him up and down. "You look like you know your way around a wrench," Lou said. "You ever work on a Triumph?" Howard's heart skipped a beat. "Rebuilt a '68 Bonneville from the frame up," Howard replied, remembering the pride he'd felt then. Lou grinned. "All right, old-timer, let's see what you got." Howard spent the next 8 hours buried in oil and chrome. Lou threw him a basket case of a BSA Gold Star, a temperamental British single-cylinder bike known for its kickback and vibration. He didn't say much, just pointed and grunted. Howard got to work. The silence suited him. It was like being back inside himself, back in the place where problems had logical solutions, where his hands knew what to do even if his head was a mess. He felt the familiar comfort of metal against skin, the satisfying click of a ratchet, the scent of gasoline and burnt oil. By late afternoon, the BSA was purring like a contented cat. Lou circled it, listening. He revved the engine, a satisfied rumble rising in his chest. "Not bad, old-timer," he admitted, a rare compliment. "Not bad at all. You're hired, weekends, $25 an hour, cash." Howard nodded, wiping grease from his forehead with a rag. $25 an hour. It wasn't foreman money, but it was a start. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm of work and rebuilding. Weekdays at the plant, the machine shop no longer felt like a prison sentence. He was still a machine operator, still 47 years old, with 17 years on the job, but something had shifted. The shame was fading, replaced by a quiet determination. He stood a little straighter, met his supervisor's eye without flinching. He even offered a suggestion on how to improve the workflow on one of the machines, and to his surprise, they listened. Weekends were spent at Lou's. The garage became his sanctuary. Surrounded by the ghosts of old engines and the promise of new builds, Howard found a focus he hadn't known he'd lost. He even started sketching again, dusting off the old notebook with his motorcycle shop plans. The custom fabrication shop, once a distant dream, began to feel a little closer. Sarah and Ben noticed the change. He was present again, engaged. At Sarah's track meet, he wasn't just a face in the crowd. He was cheering, offering advice, beaming with pride when she shaved 1/10 of a second off her personal best. Ben started asking him about engines, about carburetors, about the physics of motorcycles. Howard, for the first time in years, felt like a father, not just a financial burden. One Saturday, Lou tossed him the keys to a rusty, neglected '72 Honda CB750. "Been sitting in the back for years," Lou said. "Nobody wants it. Take it, fix it up, do whatever you want with it." Howard stared at the bike, a flood of memories washing over him. The CB750, the bike he'd always wanted but never could afford. Now here it was, a gift, a symbol of a second chance. He knew what he had to do. He'd use it to test his shop ideas and create a show bike for his dreams. This time, Howard would keep building. The Honda consumed him. Every free moment was spent tearing it down, cleaning the grime, diagnosing the ailments. $20 here for a new gasket, $50 there for a replacement cable. Howard tracked every penny in a small notebook. He sold some old tools online to fund the rebuild. It wasn't just fixing a bike, it was piecing himself back together. He was applying the logic he had in the factory to his own life. One evening, Sarah came into Lou's. She watched him work, her eyes following the dance of his wrench. "Dad," she said quietly, "you seem different." Howard paused, wiping grease from his forehead. "Different good or different bad?" Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Good different, like the dad who used to build model planes with Ben before everything." He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat familiar. "I'm trying, kiddo, trying to be that guy again." Then came the day he fired it up. Weeks of work, countless hours spent hunched over the engine, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer grit. He turned the key, held his breath, and thumbed the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. A plume of blue smoke filled the garage, the smell of gasoline and oil intoxicating. Howard revved the engine, the sound echoing in his chest, a primal, guttural roar of defiance. Lou clapped him on the back, grinning. "Sounds like she's got a new lease on life, just like you, Howard." Howard cut the engine, the silence deafening. He looked at the bike, then at Lou, then at Sarah, who was filming him on her phone, tears in her eyes. In that moment, he realized he'd reached his surface goal. The bankruptcy papers were signed, the weight lifted. It was done. He was free. The real test was with his kids, though. Ben asked to go for a ride on the fixed-up bike. Howard put his son on the back and took a cautious ride around the neighborhood. Ben squeezed his waist in gratitude. Howard realized the deep desire to earn back his kids' respect was starting to fill that fear. The shame of the past was beginning to recede, replaced by the faintest glimmer of hope. He was still scared, but now he could almost see his path forward.